In this video, I'm going to go over things that you'll need to be able to do in Excel in Chem 3 and Chem 4. So I just have some data that I've sort of made up for this video in here, mass of some substance and volume of that substance. So I just have a few sort of different data points for varying masses and volumes. To point out how to do data entry in Excel, like, say I have another data point here, I just start typing in a number, and then if I want to go down a column, I just hit enter, right? So like 9, 8, 7, 6, etc. If I wanted to type it across, how I can do that is 9, and then hit tab, and it'll do the same thing, but shift a column over rather than a row down, right? Something I want to point out about entering data in Excel, people have a tendency to type in units in their numbers. So I have not done that. I have 1.738. And then this is denoted grams by this little parentheses G up top. If I typed a G in here, watch what happens to the cell, right? So now it's oriented on the left side. So if you kind of look up top and compare here, Excel puts words, or what it perceives to be words, on the left side of the cell and numbers on the right side, right? So this is now, in Excel's mind, a word, not a number. So when you're sort of trying to enter numbers that you're going to do calculations with, leave letters out of it, right? So instead I've just typed mass parentheses G and volume milliliters up top to denote what my units are. I want to point this out. You'll notice that there's not really enough space in here in this cell to have my volume milliliters marked out. So what I can do is sort of come up here, and you'll notice my cursor sort of changes to a left and right, and I can shift, either make it a narrower row or a narrower column or a wider column, so I'll do that. You can also, once you're at this, double click and it will snap to the appropriate size to fit everything. So just kind of a neat little thing there. All right. So that's sort of data entry and sort of formatting cells. There's a bunch of options up here that you can play around with and stuff. Like if I wanted to highlight something for my attention, I could, paint it a certain color, right? Things like that, bold text, all that sort of stuff, right? Let's say we want to define this thing's density. We have mass and volumes, so I could do that, right? So over here I could calculate density, and then this would be in grams per milliliter, right? And again, this is sort of overlapping into the next cell, so I can come up here and double click that, and it'll widen it to the right size, right? So this will be mass divided by volume. So if you want to calculate something in Excel, you just hit equals in the cell that you want to calculate, and then pick your data points. So this mass, right? So cell A2, and then divided by my volume, right? So in Excel, division is a sort of /. Multiplication is not an X, because again, that ends up being a letter, and then Excel doesn't know what to do with it. So multiplication in Excel is an asterisk, and then add and subtract are plus and minus. Those two are pretty straightforward, right? So we've now calculated the density of this first data point. I could come down here and type equals that cell divided by that cell. Okay, now I've calculated it there. Or what I could do is just copy this formula down. Multiple ways to do that. I can either literally, while I have this selected, hit Control-C to copy it, select, so clicking and dragging, so click, hold, and drag, and then pasting, and it'll copy the cell format all the way down. So here it's calculating, and there's this little formula bar up top where it shows you what's generating that number. All right, so I have cell A2 divided by B2. If I go to the next one, it should be the next ones down. So A3, B3, A4, B4, so on and so forth, right? So that's one way to copy formats of cells. The other way, or another way, is you'll notice most of the time my cursor is sort of a white, sort of wide plus mark. If I come in here and go to the corner where there's a little square, it turns into a black plus mark. That means if I click and hold and drag, it will copy whatever's in that cell for however long I sort of click and drag it. So I'm just going to go through here, right? So it's now copied these. And I did excessive ones just to show you could keep going. And this will reference cell A8, B8, A9, B9. And it's giving me this sort of warning. What this is saying is I can't divide by 0. So if there's nothing in the cell, Excel interprets that number as being 0. So, you know, that's what that's all about, right? So we've now calculated the density of all of these sort of data points, right? And we created that formula ourselves. We just said, hey, we want to divide this cell by that cell, mass divided by volume, to get our densities. Excel also has a bunch of pre-programmed equations into it, common things like average. So for example, if we wanted to take an average of this data, and for clarity, I could put this anywhere. I'm just putting it down here because I don't know, I kind of like it to be down here, right? But I could also calculate the average over here, right? So this, I'm just going to come and say equals and start spelling the word average, and hey, look. So if I double click this, and now I click and drag through all of the data points we want to take an average of and hit enter, right? So just to show you, I could also just do that over here. So type average, double click, whoops, don't select too many. Same sort of thing. Would help if I also spell the word average correctly, right? So we could take an average of these data points. And again, just, I don't know, you might also at some point want to calculate standard deviations of data sets. So standard deviation is sort of a representation of the spread of the data or how precise a data set is. So I can start spelling standard deviation. So for example, here's a sample standard deviation, right? So I could come in here, click and drag, and calculate the sample standard deviation for this data set, right? And I sort of just did that to, again, demonstrate that, like, hey, look, my cell here is encroaching into the next one. So if I type something in this one, it just covers it up. So I can come back up here, double click between column B and C, and it'll snap it to the right size, right? All right, so that's largely the sort of data entry skills that you'll need to be able to do in Excel. You can calculate either your own formulas, which is what we demonstrated here, or there's some pre-programmed ones that you can use. There's quite a lot of pre-programmed ones you can use. The last sort of thing that you'll need to be able to do for Gen Chem, Chem 3 and Chem 4, is generate scatter plot graphs. So this is a little bit different depending on if you're on a Mac or a PC, but largely up top here in this toolbar, for me, I go to insert, and I'm on a Mac, or I'm on a PC, sorry. I go to insert, and then here is a thing called charts. The UI is a little bit different if you're on Mac, but like kind of just mess around with the toolbar up top, find something that's called charts. It might be called graphs depending on what version of Excel you're in. But what we're looking for is a scatter plot where we have an X coordinate that corresponds to a Y coordinate, right? And so I could take this data and plot that, right? Like we could plot mass and volume on a graph. So let's go ahead and do that. So I want scatter. So that's this guy. You'll notice that when I hover over, it says insert scatter X, Y, or bubble chart. If I click this, it gives me a drop-down menu of different options. For this particular, I mean, these have different uses. For this graph, I don't really want the data points to be connected, so I'm just going to click here. Okay, cool. I've created a blank graph. I didn't mean to do that, so I'm going to delete that really quick. And instead, I'm going to select this data here first that I want to go into my graph. So I go to Insert, this guy, Scatter. All right, cool. So I now have a bunch of data, these data points here. You'll notice when I click the graph, two things. The UI up top changes, the interface changes. We can sort of edit the chart. And then it also shows me what data I have selected, right? So that's the stuff here, right? So I'm going to go ahead and add some sort of chart titles and stuff. So how to do that? Well, it's got a chart title, so I can click this and double click in here, and this could be called like a density of an unknown metal. Let's say I weighed out a metal, right? So sweet. I don't have any labels on my X or Y axes, so I can go to add chart element, axes titles, primary horizontal, primary vertical, and then same thing come in here, right? So if we wanted to have density that's mass over volume, right? So my y-axis would be mass, my x-axis would be volume. So mass in grams, volume in milliliters, right? And the idea here is, right, like if we added a line to this, right, the slope of that line, the rise over the run, the y over the x, would give us our density, right? So if I put mass on the y and volume on the x, then the slope of that line would be the density. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's add a trend line, right? So there's several ways to do this. You can come over here to add chart element again, and there's trend line, and then there's different options. This is a pretty straight line, so I'm going to add a linear one, right? But that didn't give us the slope of our line, which is what I was looking for. So if I click the trend line and right click, and depending on what version of Excel you have or how kind it's being to you, when you click the line, sometimes a little window will pop open here, which will give you editing options. So I have to click it and right click it. So I have clicked to select the trend line, and then I've right clicked to format it. And this is that window I was talking about. So it's linear, that's great. We can get an equation. So if you scroll down this, we can display an equation and an r² value, which I'll talk about that in a second, right? Okay, so I said that the slope of our line should be the density, which it's like a half, and our densities here were like 1.7. So I probably screwed this up. Oh, yeah, it's this. So the default in Excel is that the leftmost column, when you go to select data for a graph, the left column is the X value, and then the column to the right of it are the Y values. So I need to flip my numbers. There's multiple ways of doing this because I still want mass on the Y and I want volume on the X. How I like to do it is right-click the graph. This is sort of my go-to for everything in Excel. If you want to edit something, select what you want to edit and right-click, and somewhere in here is probably an option for you to fix what you want. So I want to select my data, right? So here's the series, this set of data that's on the graph. I want to edit it and change my X and Y value. So you'll see here it says series X values A2 through A7, so that's that. I don't want that. I'm going to delete that and select my Y values and then just flop these around. So I should have mass on my Y, so the A's should be the Y and the B's should be the X's, which is what I have, and I'll click OK. And the graph should have fixed itself if we come back here. It doesn't look like much has changed, but the slope has, right? The slope is now representing our density, right? Another way to fix that is quite simply just flip the so I'm gonna undo a few steps here, so we're back to the wrong graph. Another way is to just quite literally sort of swap the data around. So I'll sort of show this again. So I could now that I know. Whoops. So I'm just gonna shift this over. So I'm cutting and pasting it. Now that I know, right, or I told you guys that the left is the X values and the right ones are the Y, I can come in here and just switch the locations and then go to insert my scatter, right? Add chart elements again, axes titles. Right, so I'm double clicking in here, typing the stuff. And then what did we say this was, like density of an unknown metal. Right. And I can show you the other way. The way I normally add trend lines is I just click a data point and then right click, and then there you can add a trend line to that data set. So And notice how that little window popped over here for me so I can get my equation, right? So either way works. The reason I wanted to show you the right-click the graph and go to select data is sometimes you will have already made the graph, and then it's easier to just change the data once you have everything labeled rather than recreate the graph from scratch, right? So here's our graph where the slope of our line represents the density of the data, right? Or sorry, the density of our unknown metal, right? And it's different, right? You'll notice here than the average, right? So the reason for that is when you add a trend line to an Excel data set, it's accounting for like all of the points and doing something called least squares regression, which if you've had stats, you sort of know what I'm talking about. But the only other thing we're going to expect you to do in Excel is actually potentially pull out more data about trend lines. So how to do that, there's instructions in the Word document about how to activate the data analysis tool pack in your versions of Excel, whether you have a Mac or a PC. I have it already activated in mine. So if I go to data over here, on the right, you should see something that says like data analysis. So if I click that, what I want is regression. And this is alphabetized, so you're going to basically only use it in this class for regression. So just go down to the R, click it. All right, and it's going to prompt me for a few things. I want the Y values for my graph, so input the Y ranges, so just click and drag through my volumes. Whoop, sorry. Click and drag through my masses. It asks for the Y's first, then input the X's, click and drag through the volumes. And then there's a bunch of stuff here that you don't really need to worry about, things like residuals, all that sort of stuff. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to click OK, and it should propagate into a new worksheet. Right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to click OK. All right. So notice how everything is sort of crammed into each other here. If you select all of these rows and then double click between any of the two columns, sorry, I said rows and columns. If you select all of the columns and then you click between any two of them, it'll spread all of them appropriately, right? So this stuff is what we'll potentially ask you about in your reports down here, right? So this is the slope. What I'm highlighting in yellow here is the slope, and if we go back to our spreadsheet, 1.388, yep, 1.387 on the sort of chart we made, the graph rounded, and then this is the intercept, the y-intercept, right? And then the number to the right of those is the uncertainty or the error in each of them, right? So the stuff I'm highlighting in red. So our slope is 1.738 plus or minus 0.002, right? And our y-intercept, or sorry, yeah, our y-intercept is 0.001 plus or minus 0.03, right? So this is on reports throughout the semester, you might get asked to put, you know, the slope and the error in the slope and the intercept and the error in the y-intercept, and that's where to find those is through the data analysis tool pack, selecting regression, right? So that's pretty much, I think, all that you'll need to be able to do in Excel for this course, just data entry, creating your own formulas, using pre-programmed formulas, constructing graphs, and then doing the regression for linear trend lines of those graphs. So you won't be doing any sort of graphs for a couple of weeks, so still sort of watch through this video once or two times, sort of play around with Excel, get used to it, and let us know, let any of us lab instructors know if you have any questions. All right, thanks for watching.